This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Hey, I'm Greer. Welcome to the Unfinished Idea podcast, a space for you to expand your understanding about the neurodiverse world, which is all around us. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us as we help bring awareness and better understanding about those who are neurodivergent and families who are raising children with special needs. I'm a mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and together with my husband, raising a child with additional needs. I often feel lonely and overwhelmed in my daily experience because life looks different for us. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and insights into the difficulties, joys, and differences of the neurodiverse world. So let's start the conversation. At the end of this episode, we are taking a minute to rest, reflect, and learn a new way to help us do self-care. So make sure to listen all the way to the end to have that minute of reset. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to share something exciting with you. I've started a WhatsApp community called the Unfinished Community, a space where we can keep the conversation going, connect and chat about the everyday joys, struggles, and differences. If you'd love to be part of this journey, click the link below in the show notes to join. I can't wait to see you there. Today's conversation is with Catie. She's a neurospicy mama who loves to be real, talks about the realities of being neurodivergent, but also raising neurodivergent too. We talk about how we can have breaks and little moments of rest and what it can look like to have 5 minutes of peace. We also talk about the busyness of all the things that we as moms do when it comes to raising neurodivergent kids, like the various therapies, meetings, appointments, forms, the list goes on. So let's jump into my conversation with Catie. And remember, at the end of the episode, we will have a mindful moment, so stay till the end to take a minute of peace. So Catie, you are on Instagram sharing your life, and part of what you talk about is being neurospicy. Can you explain what is neurospicy?
I can't even remember where I heard the term. I think it was like on TikTok or something. And I instantly just fell in love with the term. For me and how like I describe the term, everyone's going to maybe have a little bit of a different definition or how they're going to use it personally. But it's just a fun play on word for being neurodivergent. And neurodivergent is this huge umbrella that so many people fit under. And so I'm like, my brain is just spicy and it works differently. I use it for my kids too. And I think it's just a fun way to also help them describe that your brains are just a little spicy sometimes. And, you know, it makes it easier for them to comprehend. It's a fun way to describe how our brains are working. I've also heard neurosparkly. We've got sparkly brains. We've got spicy brains, brains that just work differently. That being neurodivergent, that can feel just heavy and overwhelming. But it kind of is just like, yeah, my brain is spicy. We're having a spicy day, and kind of just be like, I can handle my spicy brain today versus my neurodivergent brain. It made that time in my life figuring everything out like, oh, yeah. We're just a little extra spicy. Add a little extra spice. Go about our day.
You talk about your journey of becoming neurospicy, kind of realizing you have ADHD and autism because of your children and their diagnosis.
Yeah.
What was that like for you as you were kind of figuring it all out?
It was wild. I've always kind of known the ADHD part. You know, everyone kind of jokes like, oh, I'm a little ADHD. I always knew there was a piece of that, but I'm a girl. It was also hard to tell people and really admit that I had ADHD because I wasn't some 12-year-old boy who was like fidgeting and bouncing off the walls. But I also knew that there were things that I really struggled with. Doing a lot of reflecting back in school and in my childhood, I was like, there were a lot of things that I struggled with but didn't have the language for that. You know, like I procrastinated like crazy. Chatty Catie, like a lot of those other kind of words that get associated with females. I think a lot of us millennials were called chatty Caties or, you know, super quiet, introvert, you know, like weird, you know, different, whatever, troublemaker, whatever. There were so many other terms that because we didn't fit the ADHD box, And so it was actually my oldest daughter. So I have 4 kids. My 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and 6-year-old are all autistic. My oldest also has ADHD and anxiety. I saw the anxiety and ADHD in her early because I was like, oh my gosh, that was all stuff that I did as a kid. So like watching her kind of go through that, I was like, I want to get her the help that I didn't get and didn't have access to as a kid. And so, the more we kind of started working with her and realizing that like we should probably go through the evaluation process, get formal diagnoses to help her and give her tools so she doesn't feel out of the box. When you're the parent filling out all of the evaluation forms for your kids, I had already kind of figured out the ADHD piece. I was going through the evaluation process with her and I'm answering all of these questions and I'm like, I can also say yes to like all of these questions that I'm answering for my daughter that like I had never done. The evaluation process, it's so many questions, evaluating your child down to the smallest detail. I had never had to break down my kid to be like, she's difficult, and having to kind of admit that as a parent, but also then realizing, oh wow, that's also me too. I learned to internalize it because outwardly expressing a lot of those things as a kid was like, you don't do that. You don't express your feelings. And so it was a lot of aha moments. As we were going through all of this, it was like, oh my gosh, that there was more than just the ADHD piece. There were other things that I was struggling with that I thought it was just me. I thought it was just weird things that I did. Turns out it was like coping mechanisms that I learned. It's been kind of like this awakening a little bit, even though I already know that's who I am. But like having the language and kind of that validity of like, one, you're not crazy. And the things that you went through as a kid and dealt with and experienced is totally valid. Learning to take off the mask as an adult is scary. Like, I don't know how to really be comfortable being myself. You kind of are, my therapist calls it, she's like, you're like a scientist. Like, you can ask questions, you're figuring stuff out while also like parenting and teaching your kids how to do that. So like you're learning and modeling it for your kids, which is hard, but also exciting to be like open more with my kids and be like, yeah, I've got anxiety, like really bad. And there are things that mom struggles with. And my kids are like, wait, parents struggle with that too? And it's like, yeah, like just because we're parents doesn't mean like, it's this automatic, free ride of no issues. Helping them understand that like I'm on this journey with them too, that like we kind of get to do this together, I think is really helpful. So yeah, it was kind of just this like snowball evolution of recognizing these things. And it's like, oh, wow.
What would you say to the parent who is filling out those forms and kind of realizing I can answer yes to all of them as well? What would you say should be one thing that they could do for themselves?
I can be really scary because I realized that like I put it off and kind of denied it for a really long time. It's scary to kind of admit these things about yourself or these things that you struggle with or that you have been hiding or masking for so long because you wanted to feel seen and heard. You molded and masked for a long time. Take some time to sit with it and kind of recognize that like it is okay. And I think there can be so much shame that either society or we put on ourselves for either doing things differently or feeling different or being different or, feeling misunderstood because our brains process and work in a different way. It's not easy, but you're not alone. Like I was sharing this exact same story with a friend of mine on Instagram and she was like, it's so nice to know that we have so much more in common and a lot of our stories are going to be very similar. It's hard because not a lot of people talk about it. TikTok and Instagram are so great because more people are open about their stories and feeling comfortable and safe, knowing that other people are going to relate to things that they have experienced, which I think is so huge because we've kind of been flying under the radar for so long. And so having a lot of those like Me Too moments and recognizing that I'm not alone in this is so great. And not everyone has to be super open and share their story, but I think it does help knowing that you are definitely not alone and that it is okay if you want to pursue a diagnosis and it's okay if you don't. If you're okay just knowing, kind of like self-diagnosing, being like, yep, I can check all of the boxes, but don't want to get a formal diagnosis, that's totally okay too. Sometimes there can be pressure, but self-validation and that self-diagnosis can be so healing. Being like, oh, wow, like that makes so much sense. And this helps because your perspective is going to shift a little bit and you're going to kind of have a lot of those self-recognition things, especially as you're parenting. Because most likely, like, even if your kids aren't, formally diagnosed, like, you're going to recognize, like, things in your kids. And there's going to be a lot of teaching opportunities for yourself and be like, oh, I need to change the way I parent. I need to change the way that, like, I'm approaching certain situations or how I'm parenting this particular kid or how we can handle certain situations or setting boundaries. There's a lot of things that, like, a diagnosis can't really help you with, but recognizing you're neurodivergent can be powerful for you and for your kid as they get older. They're going to have those tools. So it's just this beautiful evolution. And like every day, you're constantly learning about yourself and about your children. It's like, oh, wow, like there's so much you learn and it can be super overwhelming, but like, you kind of just go a little bit by bit and, you'll find your flow and you'll find your groove with you and your kids.
You mentioned how because of your diagnosis as well as your kids, like you've been able to model and kind of, share how you have meltdowns like other people do. So how do you model taking care of yourself and that kind of self-care of being a mom, but also being a neurodivergent or neurospicy mom?
Yeah. That one is hard. I do my best. My kids know when I have my headphones on that mom's overstimulated. The minute mom's headphones go on, it's kind of like, we got to tone it down. I'm a regular bath taker. Baths have been transformational for me. I don't know what it is. My kids know that mom's bath time is sacred. I do my best to, get dressed every day, regardless of what I'm doing. Even if I don't do anything else, getting dressed or changing my clothes. Like I don't always do my hair. I don't always do my makeup, but getting dressed. And like me and my daughter, like she calls it getting ready for the day. We get ready for the day, regardless of what we're going to wear. We do that almost every single day. It's hard now that like my kids are in school. They don't see a lot of the things that I do at home. But I think when those things happen, mom is in a better mood, maybe less feisty. Mom is, it takes time to figure out what's going to work for you and your schedule. And I think that is hard. Like it has taken me a long time to get here and a lot of burnout to get to this place. And so I think so much grace. And sometimes I think a lot of the times self-care had to be kind of like this big thing. It had to be like an everything shower, or, something like really kind of grandiose that would take like an hour or two. And while sometimes that is great and needed, I take a bath, but it's at the end of the day, when my kids are kind of doing their wind down time. But sometimes it's sitting in the quiet car with my Pepsi for 5 minutes. Sometimes it's locking the door to my closet and sitting for 5 minutes. Sometimes it's just something really small that will just kind of carry me through that rest of the day, that it's not this big grand thing. And I don't always make an announcement. Sometimes I slip away and I'm like, I literally need 5 minutes. I need to calm myself down so that I don't like completely explode on my kids. It's trial and error, which is finding what works for you and for your family. Do you really need a bath or to sit in the car with seat warmers for like 10 minutes, you know? And so it's kind of going back into that like self-reflection and being like, what does my body really need? What does my brain really need? How can I best help myself depending on how young or old your kids are? You may have more flexibility, or it's those little 5-minute breaks throughout the day because you're so overstimulated because there's so many sounds and things going on that you put on your headphones and an audiobook or something like that. So it's finding that balance and also openly communicating with your kids. Mommy is really overstimulated. Can we turn the TV down or off for a few minutes? You know, can you give mommy 5 to 10 minutes to chill out? Like mommy needs to go to timeout for a few minutes. Or, I am very fortunate that my husband does work from home. And so I can, sometimes have him take over if he's not on a call for work to be like, I just need a few minutes so that I can then come back and, resume what, we're doing dinner or whatever. Having that open communication too with your significant other and your kids also makes a huge difference, because they then are going to be aware of how you're really feeling. And then it gives them the space to be open with you too when they're experiencing those. So, it's kind of that mutual. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that kind of modeling again, like showing, I need space and it's okay to have space, and doing it in the right way. So then your kids can see like, oh, this is how you ask for, instead of screaming or whatever. Yeah. Like self-care doesn't have to be like, I've done self-care, now I'm good for 3 days. It could be, I have 5 minutes to get me to the next 3 hours.
Yes.
My husband comes home and I can hand over the kids to him or whatever that is. And so, 5 minutes can be a lot.
Yeah. Yesterday I was feeling blah. So I sat down with my daughter and I call them my emotional support cookies. So I just sat down on the couch next to the fireplace and just ate my cookie with my daughter watching the TV. Most people won't think that's self-care, but it's the dopamine. Sometimes you got to follow whatever your body or brain needs in that moment. Do it because you're going to get that little okay, whether it's that relief or boost to then do what you need to do. But 5 minutes really can make the biggest difference. Or I found, especially with my neurodivergent brain, timers are also really great. And be I'm going to set a 10-minute timer. And I tell my kids too, sometimes our brains just need a checklist, a timer, a little, something that's just going to, twerk our brains just a little bit. Again, everyone's going to be so different and everyone's going to define self-care a little bit differently, because sometimes self-care gets overused and kind of thrown out in so many different ways. Doing something for yourself, giving yourself a brain break is so huge. And I think there's also a physical self-care and a mental self-care. There is this silent mental exhaustion. No one can see. Your kids may be able to see it, or you may speak in a different tone, or you may be a little more on edge. But to everyone else, no one would know what you're dealing with. Sometimes those 5 minutes give your brain a chance to chill. Now, it's not only just for you physically, but your brain to calm down. While physically, I could use a break. Sitting down sounds great, but I need my brain to be quiet. I tell my therapist I need to let my brain spiral for 10 to 20 minutes, and then I'm good. My brain just needs to go, 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 go. Sometimes I need to give my brain that break and not just my physical body. So sometimes that's where the headphone comes in. That's where an audiobook comes in. That's where the quiet car comes in. My environment needs to change. Something else needs to change so that I don't completely lose it.
I think you're on mute.
Workday's starting to sound the same.
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
Yeah, I think it's really like for me in kind of conversations with other people of like hitting home of how like neurotypical people might find a task that might be one task in their brain, but for someone neurodivergent, that might be 12 tasks in their brain to do that one thing. 12 tasks to do one thing for anyone is tiring.
Absolutely.
And to have that space for them to have mental breaks if needed or whatever, it's something that I've really tried to put into place in our house as well. Like just having grace.
Yeah. And I've recognized that with my kids too. Like when they come home from school is a lot for their brains, especially with my daughter. She's gotten a little bit better about, she doesn't hide herself. But at school, it is kind of very rigid and you've got the schedules and you follow the rules. When they get home, they are free to do what they need to do. Like, sometimes my daughter just needs some quiet time in her room. Sometimes she needs to blast the music at 100 volume. So giving my kids space to do that too when they come home from school, especially if it's been a long day or, they've been doing testing, whatever it may be. Also giving them the space to decompress. Even neurotypical kids, school is just a long day. Like it's long for them. They have really long days. Helping them just have a safe place to come unglued from, let the day go and get into our home routine. So, yeah.
Yeah. Last year was rough for my son. They start school here in the UK. 4 to 5 was a really hard year for him because he loves structure and reception is no structure, basically. It's very much play. Focus. You sit for 5 minutes into your learning and then you play for like an hour and then you do 5 minutes of learn. Last year, he would come home and just let loose. Some days it was him sitting in a room with a screen, no one talking. But other days it was whatever, it was just kind of different, whatever. And then this year is very much more structured.
Great.
He's loving school, which is great. But I find that it's even different how he decompresses now. He doesn't quite need as much time, I guess. Or, and that was something I hadn't really thought of like that idea that depending on the situation depends on how much time, kind of recovery time, I guess.
Totally.
And to have kind of grace of that kind of one day you might need an hour and one day you might not.
COVID was my daughter's kindergarten year. She would come home from school and I didn't recognize who she was. I remember talking to her OT being like, I don't know who this person is coming home from school. She had such a hard time with that transition from school because she thrives off structure. She is my girl who hates summer. She wishes school was year round. She loves and thrives off knowing what she needs to do every single hour, every single day. She would come home and melt down. It was her brain getting used to being at school all day long. And then now that she's older, she's 10, almost 10, she comes home and she's great. She needs a little bit of decompressing time, but those little brains, as they're getting used to certain things or as they're transitioning from one, environment to another. A lot of the times we don't realize how much that really affects not only us, our environment here at home where it's quiet and then our environment changes now with kids coming home and needing snacks and, you're either doing extracurricular activities or, you're trying to get dinner ready. Our environment is changing for all of us. You don't think about it that way, that our environment is changing and their environments are changing. They're going from school to pickup or school to bus to home. There's so many little things that you start to realize and think about. You're either neurodivergent or you're working with your kids and you're I would have never thought about it this way, or I would have never seen this perspective. But you start to make those shifts. They're changing environments, and my environment is now changing. I need to mentally prepare myself for my kids, and we need to give them grace and not be so, on them about certain things when they come home, because they're still working through stuff. They may have been dealing with it at school, but we don't know about it. They may be internalizing it in different ways depending on their age or capabilities of interpreting what's going on at school.
Yeah, we need to think about, how our environments change, because just because we have a home life that we do the same routine, it doesn't mean that's the same environment, if that makes sense. They might have had a bad day at school. So yes, they're coming home to doing the same thing, but that environment changes. Sometimes we have rough mornings. Getting them to school is letting the school know, here you go.
Yes. And then you kind of carry that as the parent, making sure that doesn't totally affect and deflate your day, but it is something you are going to mentally take on. You can help them when they get home, and that you're in that space to, either talk about it or work through it with them. Like, my 7-year-old has struggled with school since kindergarten. School has been so hard for him, and it's exhausting, not only for the kid, but for the parent. And, working through all of that. My husband's neurodivergent, but our neurodivergence are very different. We're similar in a lot of ways, but there are times where I'm like, you don't do that. And he's like, no. And I'm like, how do you not do that? Sometimes I'm just like, how do you function? I just am baffled. He can just go about his day, whatever. And I'm just like, how are you able to do that? I don't understand, sometimes it's just, we're both neurodivergent, but other times I'm just like, okay.
I mean, the amount of times I've said to my husband, why did you do that? Or what were you thinking? And not in a aggressive way, just in a I don't understand how 1 + 1 = 10 in your head.
Exactly.
Tell me how you got there, because this makes.
And my husband looks at me and does the same. He's like, really? And I'm like, don't ask me. I don't know. This is just how, these are the rules. Apparently I do make the rules, but I don't know the rules though, but this is just how it needs to be.
What would you want the world to know about neurodivergence?
Oh my gosh. There's so much that we still don't know, and that I don't know if we'll ever really know everything when it comes to being neurodivergent. And that I think it really is a beautiful thing. It is hard, and it is so exhausting, especially if you are neurodivergent and you're raising neurodivergent kids. You're going to cry at the end of a lot of days because it feels extra hard. And there are times where you're going to wish that you had a normal or regular brain, because that would feel easier. But I'm like, I wouldn't change my brain or my children's for anything. It makes them who they are. If we were all the same, it's kind of like we were all created uniquely and beautifully different. If we all had the same brains, I don't want that. I love that all of my friendships are unique and different, and that I've got neurotypical friends and I've got my neurodivergent friends. And, I think it takes a lot of work, but it is so worth it. And I think there is so much power that we have to either help other people recognize that they're neurodivergent too, or help those who aren't neurodivergent just gain a little bit of insight. They're never going to fully understand how our neurodivergent brains work, and they may want to live in ignorance. They may never want to understand or want to help or be supportive. There are people who aren't going to want that, and that is okay. But there are going to be people who want to support you, who are able to support you, who want to find ways to do that. Not everyone is going to understand, but there are people who do understand, or who want to understand, who want to learn, who want to be better. And the more we can share, especially women, the more we can be open, even if it's just in like your community, like in your family, with your husband, the more that we can be open about what we're going through, finding a therapist, finding a community, like it's kind of like that rock in the water. Like you have no idea what that ripple effect will do or who it will touch or how it will change. But like it will forever change someone or help someone or give someone the courage to seek a diagnosis or to pursue something for their children. And so I think there's a lot of little things we can do that can make a big difference, even if we don't see it right away.
Yeah, that's really true. I like starting this podcast was not something I'd planned.
Yeah.
Here we are. I got a message a few weeks ago from someone from Australia. I have no idea how she heard about this podcast. She was so sweet and wrote this message about how, this podcast had kind of helped her support her daughter, mother of someone going through a diagnosis. It just was a really big moment of like you said, kind of that we don't know where those ripple effects are, but like I printed the email and put it up in my office as a reminder of like, this is why I'm doing that. This is,
And you're not crazy. I've screenshotted messages from people who have sent me DMs or texts. That knowledge that you said something that will ultimately help someone, you really don't know. Opening your mouth to like share a story or help someone feel relatable, those are so powerful. It can be courageous. I think it helps you too. Like it's not only, for them, but it does something for you to know that, oh, wow, there's, again, kind of that I'm not alone kind of, feeling.
Yeah. I remember saying to my husband just before we launched it, I was like, well, at least I know two people who will listen to it, my mom and you. And he turned to me and said, I don't know if I'm going to listen to it. And I was like, cool, thanks. Yeah, well, here's for that. But yeah, so it's good to know like there are other people who, who also listen. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you, Catie, for coming and having this conversation. It's been really fun to hear your experience and the knowledge you've learned. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's easy to get cynical about breathing exercises, affirmations, self-care, and the like, because they don't fix the circumstances we find ourselves in that are outside of our control. You're right, they're not a fix, but they can move the needle towards a calmer nervous system. During the month of January, we're going to try different ways to help us reset. I suggest having a go when you're able and when you feel calm to find what feels good to you and then keep doing it. Take a minute to just listen to the music. Breathe if you want, stretch, sit still. Whatever you need to do, just take a minute and listen. Hey, if you can take a minute to rate and review the show, that would help us out a lot. It means new folks can find us and learn about what the show is and join the conversations themselves. So take a minute, rate, review, and let us know what you like about the show.